agreement. Oh, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just letting everyone in from the waiting room here, getting everyone in.
Should be clicking down to see. See who all's here.
Yeah, we have the presentation up, but feel free to adjust your view in Zoom for gallery view or whatever feels comfortable to you while you have the slide up so you can see folks.
Oh yeah, and people could, yeah, they're already starting to chime in with where they're from. So
Hi, Richard.
I keep having to scroll down to see everybody. Oh yeah, hello, Richard. I got to the page where Richard is, and Shirley Hazlitt. I saw Uli in here somewhere, and Johnny Flores.
Oh, hi, Andrew. Welcome.
I thought I saw Clara in there somewhere. Carissa.
Hello, Teresa.
All right, we've got a great group going here. Shall we get started?
I think so. Yeah,
Let's
this is
do
really
it.
cool. This is good. All right. So hello, my name is Liv Moe, and I am the founding director of Verge Center for the Arts, and contemporary art center in Sacramento that has been a nonprofit for 11 years now. And I'm also the board president of the Sacramento Alliance for Regional Art, which is a partner on today's convening. Sarah is a relatively new initiative we founded in 2020 as a response to the need for a more organized and structured response to arts advocacy in the region. So we oversee multiple counties in the region, and we help connect arts organizations with advocacy opportunities, professional support, and we also help them connect with one another and share resources, which is really great. One of the biggest things that we wanted to accomplish out of forming Sarah was to reflect the fact that we have an industry that contributes to an economic impact in the regions that we serve, and we do more than just the touchy-feely. Not that the touchy-feely isn't super important, and we all love it, and that's why we're in the arts, but we also wanted to focus advocacy through the lens of all of us being people who make a living off of our creative industries and how we can inform that process. And we've also been helping each other through various grant making processes. And I know we're going to talk about this later in the program, but also supporting one another in navigating various grant programs. Pull up our speakers for today. And then finally, if you're not already a member of Sarah, you can go to our website, artsforsac.org, and it will connect you with all of us, and we can start getting you on our mailing list and share resources. It's free to be a member. If you're an organization, you can also feature a profile on our website. So moving on from that, we also have Allison Flory from Yellow Arts, the executive director of Yellow Arts, with us today. William Wilson, the cultural arts supervisor of the Grand Theater Center for the Arts in Tracy, and Megan Van Voorhis, the cultural and creative economy manager for the city of Sacramento. So I'm going to turn it over to Kara now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liv. And I look forward to hearing more about Sarah's work and also from all of our partners a little bit later. And so I wanted to briefly touch on the previous slide, which is the agenda, which is just sharing that first, my name is Kara Q. Smith, and I am the manager of programs and organizational advancement for Californians for the Arts, specifically in Northern California. So it's the northern half of the state. I use she, her pronouns, and I am coming to you, maybe like many of you, from Nisenan tribal lands, also known as Sacramento. I'm located here in the region. So this is just a quick overview of what we're going to do today. Californians for the Arts is going to give some updates, and then we're going to move, we're going to have multiple moments for Q&A and discussion with all of you here today, which is what we're really here to do and really excited about, both after the updates, the state and federal updates, in discussion with us about field reflections and priorities, and then in discussion all together and with our partners about advocacy in this greater Sacramento region. I'd like to briefly just introduce the CFTA staff, and just call them out so that you'll recognize them when they start speaking today. We have Julie Baker, the Executive Director of Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates, as well as Tracy Hudak, who shares my title, Manager of Programs and Organizational Advancement, but for the southern half of the state, and Eduardo Robles, who is Manager of Communications and Field Engagement for Californians for the Arts. So we're excited to have staff here today. You'll hear from all of us a little bit. And then if we don't mind going back to that slide, again, the next slide, thank you so much. I just wanted to set the tone a little bit for us. And as many of you have done, please introduce yourself in the chat and include information on your pronouns and acknowledge the indigenous lands where you reside. If you'd like folks to connect with you, feel free to share a link. There to enable closed captioning, you may do that if you need it on the Zoom menu bar. Please keep yourself muted unless you're speaking, just to make it easy to hear folks. And if you have questions during any of our discussion section, please feel free to raise your hand using the raise hand function to unmute and speak, or to put your questions in the chat. And we just ask that you be mindful and respectful of fellow attendees here when sharing in the discussion portions. And lastly, just to note that this meeting is being recorded and will be available for everyone who registered for the and shared with everyone who registered for this event today. I'm just going, thank you. Next slide, please. Just wanted to share that we're here in the space of a regional conversation. Regional conversations are an annual opportunity for us to gather people in different regions of the state to hear from folks. We've done, this is our third iteration of regional conversations. Last year we did the same thing. A lot of what we hear in these spaces informs the work that we do. And what we heard primarily from all groups, from the conversations a year ago, is that there was a real interest in doing these again, that there's a valuable space for discussion. And so we're excited to be engaging in that today. And I am now going to hand it over to Julie Baker.
That's my cue. Thank you so much, Kara. Kara is based in Sacramento, and she, for all of you who are engaging with our organizations, is your point of contact for the Sacramento region. So, you know, she'll put her information, I know, in the chat, and anything that comes up after this, or any time where you need support in advocacy, or you need support understanding what are some of the things happening in the federal or state landscape in terms of public funding and public policy for arts, culture, and creative industries and workforce, reach out to Kara. So yeah, I'm Julie Baker. I'm the executive director of both of the organizations, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm coming from the unceded land of the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan, which is otherwise known as Nevada City, California, about an hour from all of you wonderful Sacramento area and Davis and Tracy and everything else communities. So we do have two organizations, just really quickly. C4, which is a lobbying organization, California Arts Advocates. Our job is to persuade the legislators primarily at the state level to support and invest in our industry, and to work on legislation that can also support the sustainability of our industry and the workforce, and to make sure that we are in the rooms where these conversations are being had, and that we are representing the voices of our sector to public policy makers. So we spend a lot of time these days virtually in rooms talking to them. And then at Californians for the Arts, we're really your advocacy service organization, giving you information that you might need in order to build your own toolkit to become effective advocates locally, statewide, federally. and to provide you with the information of what is happening out there in terms of public policy for our sector at all those different levels. All right, so next slide. It's great to see so many wonderful people here in the chat that I know, worked with over the last several years. I just want to quickly also share who we are as an organization in terms of our commitment and statement of values. I'm not going to read it all because I don't need to necessarily read it for you. This is also available on our website. But really our work is to ensure that there are resources that are directed to actions to offset years of economic, social, and cultural disparity in our state, in our country, by addressing systemic racism in the arts. We are committed as an organization to be anti-racist. This is obviously a journey. We are not there. I don't know if you're ever entirely there. It's undoing 400 years of systems. And we're really committed to being accountable and transparent in our actions towards these values and policies that we are building within our own organization. So hold us accountable, ask us those tough questions, let's engage in those conversations, and we want to work with you towards changing the systems that have been built up in this country that are very much impacting our sector as it does in every industry and person in our country. So next slide. So just quickly, I wanted to share some of the things that all of us accomplished in this last year. It was an unprecedented, the overused term, year for arts, culture, and creative industries advocacy wins. We actually were able to achieve, and this is, I'm talking about the state level, over $600 million in investment into arts recovery. We were able to get signed the first creative workforce bill, which was Senate Bill 628, the California Creative Workforce Act. We saw you engage at unbelievable levels, increased by 300% in how many people sent in letters, showed up for meetings with your representatives, signed petitions, made phone calls, did all of that good work that actually really did, and I will always say, make that difference. And those of you who are engaged in local advocacy know how important that is. And then we also were able to see mayors like Daryl Steinberg, and thank you to Andrew Kehoe, who's here, who helped champion that for us in the office, recognizing the value of making that investment at the state level. And you can see our lovely image. Go ahead, move to the next slide, around artists or second responders, which is definitely something that we continue to use as a narrative that really seems to resonate. And we, in fact, got a resolution last year at the Senate and the Assembly recognizing artists as second responders. We did some other things last year, including an impact survey that really helped to inform our work on the lobbying side. And we did this on our C3 side. We do a lot of webinars. Some of them in this last year were very specifically around reopening the arts, some of it being around safety and reopening the arts. We actually created a task force around that. We had over 50 people across the state in a task force. We do a wonderful thing in April called Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month, which we'll talk a little bit more about that. And, sometimes our advocacy is not just to get the funds, but it's also to hold the agencies accountable that receive those funding. And for example, this last year, the California Arts Council at the beginning only released 21% of applications received funding. We went back and created petitions, and very quickly, between grass tops and grassroots advocacy, we're able to see that change, and they doubled the amount of grants that were funded right away. So that was really important. Next slide. So that was our C3, Californians for the Arts. On the CAA side, I mentioned we did our first piece of legislation. It was really exciting and fun and hard and interesting. And if you've ever worked in that, it's something, it's definitely different than what we grew up with, how a bill comes into law. What was it called? Anyway, and so check that out. It's California Creative Workforce Act. It's the first one in the United States from a state. And you'll see some of our efforts this year will be to fund that. And there were a number of other things that we were able to secure last year, including, as I mentioned, about 600 million. There are some programs that I'm going to talk about that you'll get a sense of what's happening with those in terms of status. So we'll go to the next slide. Mindful of time. So here are some of the allocations that happened last year in the budget. And I just wanted to give you an update on where those are because many of you will be able to apply for those. If, for example, you run a performing arts organization with an annual budget of under $2 million, coming up soon, I'm actually having a meeting next week with the Office of Small Business Advocate, should be grants up to $75,000 to help with payroll, actually. So actually to help you with the additional costs now that AB5 is in our world. So that's something very specific that I hope everyone will, if it makes sense for you, be able to apply for. Recently just closed grant applications for the California Venues Grants and Promoters and Live Events Operators Grants Program. That was $150 million. Also went to the California Office of Small Business Advocate. That's grants for up to $250,000. If you applied for that, and just a side note, and you are curious about what's going on with your application, or you're confused, or if you've been declined, please let us know. And maybe someone on my team can just put my email in there. There are some things there that we're going back to the legislature potentially with to make sure that that grant program really meets the needs of what it was intended for. Sometimes when things get translated from legislation to grants, it doesn't always work as we had hoped. So we'll be working on that. There's also a museum grant program. $50 million went to Natural Resources Agency. We're expecting that they're going to be voting on that any day now in terms of the grant guidelines. So stay tuned for that opening up. There was $40 million went to the California Arts Council for Creative Youth Development, which are some of the existing programs that they have for youth in the arts. And then a new program called the California Creative Core Pilot Program, which is $60 million also to the California Arts Council. And our understanding is that should be, the grant guidelines should be voted on potentially in March, and you might see that coming out as early as spring. Next slide. I just want to quickly say what some of these things mean. Creative Youth Development is, as I mentioned, $40 million. It's their programs, Youth Arts Action, Artisan School, Arts Education Exposure, Jumpstarts, and Arts Integration Training. And the definition is more that these are based in the community, not necessarily rather than schools. That's a Creative Youth Development definition. The California Arts Council sort of broadened it to both be things in schools and outside of schools as well. Next slide. And the Creative Core Pilot Program is a one-time funding that went to the CAC. It has to be expended by 2024. It's meant to, and some of you were in part of the Sacramento Artist Corps, which we used as one of the examples when we were trying to convince the administration to actually use to create this program. So thanks to Richard and others who worked on that. And it's really an economic and workforce recovery program to do all of these wonderful things, but it's really campaign and messaging programs utilizing artists and cultural organizations to deliver these messages, whether that's around public health, like the stopping the spread of COVID-19, whether that's about civic engagement, social justice, and those sorts of things. So you should be seeing those guidelines coming out any day now, we're hoping, and we'll get more money into all the counties across California for this. Next slide. And that actually has an emphasis on also communities that are in the lower low health index. Needs community with the greatest needs. Just quickly on federal advocacy, there's a lot happening at the federal level for our creative industries. Really exciting. There's actually 7 pieces of legislation currently in play, and I know one other that's in the still not yet revealed that are really exciting. So we have more information on that on our website. The first one that I wanted to mention was the Creative Economy Revitalization Act. That's essentially a WPA for the 21st century that has $300 million in that for programs to create programs throughout the United States like the WPA did. We're looking at annual appropriations for NEA and NEH and to increase those. We're talking about things like the SVOG, the Shutter Venues Operators Grant Extension Act, so that people have longer amount of time to utilize those allowable expenses. There's some stuff around the employee retention tax credit, which had been eliminated in the 4th quarter, but we're trying to get that reinstated. There is some talk around more relief since we're understanding now, of course, with the variant, how much we're seeing already, more shutdowns, and also the cost of keeping things alive in terms of testing, live being your businesses. And then just yesterday, there was a really exciting hearing at the federal level called The Power, Peril, and Promise of the Creative Economy, which we also will have a link to on our website and encourage you all to watch. And now I want to introduce just a quick video from Senator Padilla, who is our senator here for California, talking about his emphasis on the arts. So go ahead.
Hello, Californians for the Arts. I want to thank you for gathering to support and uplift our creative community through this COVID-19 pandemic. Inspiring art enriches our lives and our communities. And California is a global leader in empowering artists of all backgrounds to tell their stories. But the reality is that creative workers were among the hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, with more than 62% experiencing unemployment. That's why in October, I was proud to join a group of my colleagues to introduce the Creative Economy Revitalization Act. This bill will help bolster the creative economy by employing artists and writers to create publicly available art. Now, this measure will also support local artists who continue to feel the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. California's creative economy is also a critical engine of our state's success, generating millions of jobs and billions of dollars in economic activity. As part of my commitment to the arts, I am also working to increase funding for the National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities. Both endowments received an additional $135 million through the American Rescue Plan, a bill that I was proud to support. The ARP also delivered critical relief through economic injury disaster loans, the Paycheck Protection Program, and the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program. As we respond to the changing conditions of the pandemic, I'll continue to advocate for California's artists in the United States Senate. By sharing your voices and stories, you can help pass the Creative Economy Revitalization Act and support the arts in years to come. I thank you for joining this conversation today and look forward to continuing our work together.
That's great. We just wanted to, lift up Senator Padilla and make sure you know that, we also do federal advocacy. We'll work pretty closely with his office, and he really does support our industry here in DC on our behalf. Next slide.
Hello, Californians for the Arts.
Go to the next slide. Here we go. Quickly, our state advocacy update is that this year, what we're fighting for is a $50 million appropriation for the California Creative Workforce Act. It passed last year without an appropriation. So in order for it to actually be operational, we are looking for a $50 million. We also, SB 805, which created the funding ultimately for helping small budget nonprofit performing arts organizations under $2 million to comply with AB5. That coalition is continuing to meet and determining their next steps. So stay tuned for more information on that. And if AB5 is a specific issue we want to understand more about, please reach out to us. We will be doing a webinar also on that again in February. We are looking actually also to increase the California Arts Council's their local assistance funding. There's a lot of great things that the governor's put in the budget this year, which we'll talk about in a second, for the arts, but the actual ongoing funding for the arts remains at $26 million. As you can imagine, that's a pretty small pie for a country that has a state that has 40 million people. So we are always looking to increase that overall. So likely what you'll be seeing us advocating for, and you'll get more information about that as the months go on in the legislative session, would be to increase that by $14 million to $40 million, or $1 per capita. But we're going to be asking for it over 3 years, so a $42 million increase. And the governor has put in $30 million for cultural districts. There are 14 pilot programs currently administered that was chosen by the California Arts Council. This $30 million over 3 years would be to expand that program, not to fund both the existing pilots as well as an expansion of that. And there was a study done that really shows that there are some very specific equity recommendations to make for that program that we will be ensuring the legislature is aware of in order for that to, if that is to get through the budget process. We are looking continued relief funding and things like that. There's a couple of big things happening with arts education this year, some exciting stuff. There is a ballot measure that has been introduced. First thing that has to happen is they have to get at least 1 million signatures for that to actually become a ballot measure. And that is actually for $800 million from the general fund, of the annual general fund budget, to focus to be given to local schools for arts education. So we'll be tracking that, and we'll have more information on that if you're interested in learning more. And we're also going to be, yes, Megan, there'll be ways eventually for you to sign on to that. And so I just met with the team yesterday who's doing the ballot measure. So we'll be getting more information. It's just launching. And the policy is creative roundtables. We'll be doing more of some of these this coming year, where we're going to be digging deep into certain issues about the creative workforce and what policies we could be developing and introducing to really support our sector that have not yet been brought to the state level. Next slide. Next slide is Senator Ben Allen, who's our state senator, who was the author of California Creative Workforce Act. And we just wanted to share a few words from him as well.
Well, hi, everybody. State Senator Ben Allen here. I'm proud to chair the Joint Committee on the Arts, the legislature's Arts Joint Committee. And I just want to welcome everyone to the California for the Arts Winter 2022 Regional Conversations. I'm standing outside our beautiful Capitol, and I want to wish everyone, of course, a very, very happy new year. And I want to thank the arts community for all the work you've put in over the last couple of years during this incredibly difficult pandemic. We know that artists not only have been at the front lines of suffering and bearing the brunt of the pandemic, but artists have also been at the front line of helping our society respond to and heal from the trauma associated with the pandemic and all the other challenges that we've had as a society over the last couple of years. Artists as second responders coming in and into the breach and helping our society come back together and heal as we have suffered from traumas. This, of course, has been something that I've been talking a lot about as we've been trying to get more money for the arts. And the arts did very well in the 2021-2022 budget. And I'm really happy to see the governor reiterate support for the arts in the upcoming budget proposal that he just presented. It was ridiculous how little we were funding the arts when I first got into the legislature, and I'm just proud that we've all been able to come together and dramatically increase funding for arts through grants programs, California Arts Council, arts and education programs, and the list goes on and on. So one other thing I just want to mention, our Creative Workforce Act that we worked together on to get passed, which is going to try to create a mechanism for kids coming from underrepresented groups to get more pathways into the arts and into the creative industries. And it's something we're hoping to get funded, and something I know I'll be working with many people from California for the Arts in that endeavor, in that effort. Our door continues to be open. We're looking for opportunities to bring up new issues relating to arts policy. Everything from the TV film tax credit extension and expansion to arts in schools and what we can do to make sure that kids aren't slipping behind in terms of exposure to the arts in their education, to looking at the issues of arts as a healer, both for veterans, for folks who suffered from all sorts of different types of trauma, and then the everyday challenges that arts and artists have been facing, trying to make ends meet, trying to be successful and thrive under the changing climate here in our state. So I just want to welcome you, to thank you for your continued advocacy and engagement in arts policy. And as always, we have a very open door in our office. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you so much. Happy New Year.
So yeah, State Senator Ben Allen is an amazing champion for the arts. He's from Santa Monica, and we're so grateful for his leadership on many issues. He's also the chair of the Joint Committee on the Arts. And absolutely, he is also big into sustainability, as Shira mentioned in the chat. Just quickly, I wanted to share with you what is the California Creative Workforce Act of 2021, which we were sponsors of. One of the exciting things is it actually declares that creative arts workforce is a state priority. This is the first time that you've heard that artists and creative workers are a priority for the state in terms of workforce development. That's a really just socializing that language and making sure that that's part of how they see things is really critical. It actually then are also says that it develops grant programs through the California Arts Council. And it would be earn and learn job training programs for 12 to 24 months. And with living wages. This was also a very, very critical piece of the legislation that we wanted to ensure was a part of it. As we know, so many in our industry are not being afforded living wages. And so we want to make sure that that's part of it, as well as addressing racial and economic barriers to being a part of the creative workforce. And so the emphasis would be on diversifying the workforce and for people who've faced barriers to employment. And it asks that the California Arts Council actually collaborate with the Workforce Development Board to design this program, which is really important as well. As you can imagine, your state arts agency are not necessarily experts in workforce development. So we're really excited to see this happening. You'll get a copy of this deck if you're interested. You can link to the actual wording on the legislation, and hopefully you'll all help us this year to get the funding for it, because otherwise it's just kind of words on paper, which is not what we work towards. So next slide. So just quickly again, the governor just released his January budget. I'll go into a minute sort of what the budget cycle looks like. But basically, as I said, no change to the California Arts Council's budget. It's $26 million ongoing. This is what the governor's introduced. Now it goes to the legislature. There's $30 million for cultural districts, as I mentioned, over 3 years. There's 170, I think 3 or 8,000 for California Poet Laureate program, as well as literary programs for the Arts Council. And then there's a new thing that's cool, which is a state parks partnership. This is actually a $50 million one-time fund for art installations in state and local parks. And that can be everything from 3D to performances to, it's not a monument. It's not to create monuments necessarily. So it's an exciting part of what we call arts integration strategies, where we're seeing the arts in other departments other than the arts agency, and funding going directly to artists from these other agencies. So we're excited that the governor introduced that. And again, we are in support of that, and hope you'll join us in advocating to see this get through the legislature. And then I mentioned the ballot measure, but the governor also put in $937 million, which is close to $1 billion, for arts and music enrichment programs, K-6, after school, and summer programs. So that's another exciting thing that would go through the Department of Education. Go to the next slide, and I'll give you an idea of where we are in the process just really quick, because information is power, and it's really important to understand how these things work. So as I mentioned, the governor just announced his budget. Prior to the budget being announced, agencies are allowed to submit what we call budget change proposals. That's where they get to say what they would like their priorities to be. And so some of these, we're not quite there yet. The state agency, for example, the California Arts Council, they submitted a budget change proposal for the cultural districts funding. And those are also available on our website if you're interested to see how they ask for these things. Now these things will go to committees to review them in the legislature. The legislature will now ask all these questions. Department of Finance will show up, and they'll start to challenge, maybe if they agree, if they great, if they don't, they're going to poke holes in it and try to understand really what the intention is, and is this the right use of public dollars. At the same time, the legislature can introduce their own budget items. So in our case, we will find likely Senator Allen to introduce the $50 million for the SB 628, and another legislator to introduce that increase to the state arts agencies funding from 26 to $40 million. And your California Arts Advocates, as your lobbying organization, shows up at these meetings. We speak, we testify, we do a lot of meetings, basically one-on-one with chairs of budget committees and other legislators to ensure that there is support for these types of items. And so that goes through. We have lots of different things that happen in the spring to do all of that. And then basically in the next slide, by June, you start to May, there's a governor releases his May revised. And then in June, by June 15th, by the has to be passed by the legislature, otherwise they don't get paid. And then you see a final budget has to be signed by the governor within 12 days. There's a lot of follow-up and cleanup. You see things called trailer bills. So there's a lot of, I guess the point of understanding this is that there's a lot of chances and opportunities to get your budget priorities inserted. So when you read the governor's budget, it's not a done deal until July. And even after that, there's moments where you can continue to influence how it's being dispersed. So I just want to give you guys a heads up on that. And I think I'm done with my section for now. Am I right, everybody? Next, yeah. So that was my state and federal updates. I think we have time for Q&A. I may have, yeah, okay, good. Yes, no, Kara? Yeah, good.
Yeah, let's take a few minutes to it. We'll find a few minutes. There's a question in the chat about when the legislator speaks about arts, what arts are they including? Why use the language of arts and music in the education proposal?
So first question, why, what arts are they including? It depends on which legislator you're talking to. Part of our job is to explain to them it's not necessarily just visual arts, because a lot of times they think it's visual arts only, that it is really this sort of entire ecosystem of the creative industries, which is all of you who are here today and all the different aspects of what you do. And then in terms of and there's been a lot of there's certain hearings that we do. Like last year we did informational hearings to the Arts Assembly Committee, where we talked about what's happening for the creative sector during COVID. And we had a lot of different representations. So from the individual artists to the arts organizations and all the different types of genres that are in the arts. Obviously it's such a diverse ecosystem. That's part of the challenge of making it really clear for them to understand who we're talking about when we talk about the creative industries. And then in terms of why the language of arts and music and the education proposal, that I don't know the answer to. We cannot find yet a budget change proposal from the Department of Education specifically on arts and music, or why it's just arts and music, or what the intention is. But we will find out more about that as it develops. Richard, I see your question. Will there be opportunities with the creative core to engage artists for areas like climate change and environment? Yeah, that is actually in the language of the grant program, specifically around climate change. So absolutely, that's in there.
Julie Shira has her hand up.
Hey, Shira.
Hi, thank you, Julie, and thank you everybody for putting this together. This is amazing, and this work is just phenomenal. One thing I have, I don't know, that I have noticed when I'm talking with people is that I tend to use the word creative instead of the word artist. There are a couple of reasons for that, and I don't know if this is worthwhile, but I'm putting this out there. When I say arts, people automatically assume ballet museums. It's just the first thing that comes to their mind. But when I say creative, suddenly they're associating that with money. They're associating that with creative design, creative disruption, creative. Suddenly it's like the creative is something that is desired with like startup companies, tech companies. So I tend to use the word creative instead of arts, just because it becomes a lot more broader when I'm trying to convince how important the creative community is. Another question that I had, another question that I had was, a lot of independent creatives, like specifically makers, have been just demolished because as like festivals have been canceled and things like that, especially makers that go and sell at these markets, and there hasn't really been really much aid for them except for all the regular other things. And I was just wondering if there's anything in the pipeline that I could share with them.
Yeah, I think well, first of all, on the first point, yeah, we call it arts, culture, and creative industries and workforce. I mean, it's all of the above. And absolutely, we're also talking about arts as small business. We talk about arts as business. We talk, it is all of the above. And in terms of the makers and festivals, and we heard a lot about that for visual artists as well, who do festivals around, and that's how they sell their work. The pandemic unemployment assistance was a big piece of what the federal package offered. That was the first time you saw unemployment for 1099 workers. It was challenging because they didn't understand the mixed income, which we were trying to fix as well. So I think it's, I don't know if, and then there's artists fellowship grants specifically from the California Arts Council. There was relief grants, the California Relief Grant Program. If you had a sole proprietorship, you could apply for that if you could show the loss. So there were opportunities for people at the state level and federal level to access funding. I'm not always certain that we always know to show up in those spots in terms of looking to access those. So like, for example, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development has so much to offer for even, individual art makers who are have sole proprietorships. So I think we have to also look for those opportunities that exist out there. But specifically along those lines, I haven't seen anything at the federal or state level that's just focused on that. And one of the things that we are identifying are where are the gaps, right? And part of the big gap, I would say, is on the individual worker. There's been a lot of funding for organizations and venues. Hasn't been a lot of funding for the individual worker. And I think that's, something that we're all aware of. We're just trying to figure out what's the best way. And you see, that's why you're seeing, I think, these universal basic income for artists, guaranteed incomes for artists, pilot programs happening in certain cities. San Francisco, others have picked that up. And that's something maybe, you want to look at within your own communities of fighting for as well.
Great, thank you. And just noting, we'll have more opportunity for discussion coming up as well. So now I'll hand it over to Eduardo.
Hi everyone. So part of this program, or part of the regional conversation, is that we want to gain kind of multi-dimensional perspective on the field, the arts and culture practitioners. So we put together a poll, and we wish you guys to kind of help us think what are the needs of the field, and just you can see the questions. Spend like 5 minutes. You can come back to it. We would really like to collect, as much information as we can, so it can help inform our direction, our policy creation, programming, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, please be mindful, thoughtful, and share with us some info.
So yeah, just to be clear, there's a link in the chat. If you would click on that link, and if you're having trouble with it, please let us know. And if you would take the next 5 minutes to start to fill that out. If you don't get a chance to fill it out all entirely, keep it open and finish it when you can. Maybe hopefully by the end of the day. And so we'll just take a moment to pause while you're doing that.
Can everyone start wrapping up within the minute, please? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you everyone for getting the survey started and or submitting it. If you didn't finish, no worries. Feel free to do that at a later time or as we continue this discussion, but we wanted to bring some of the questions that we asked. Were very open-ended, and we thought it'd be valuable to sort of hear directly from folks as some of the responses that you might have to that as a means of just sharing as a group. And so we're just going to spend a few minutes doing that together here before we move on to our sort of hearing more from our partners and really focusing the conversation a little bit more and local advocacy in the Sacramento region and specifically the 4 counties here today. So first, does anyone want to share what are your current needs or priorities? And I know that kind of started coming up a little bit on the state level conversations. So I just wanted to ask the group that. Does anyone want to share? You can feel free to unmute yourself and share. Feel free to throw it in the chat. We'll read it out. It's not a problem. Yeah, we'll close that out. Thank you.
So for example, we've been hearing from a lot of folks, particularly in the live events section of the arts ecosystem, or any place that has to do with gathering, the cost of testing is really, really high. Sourcing the tests is difficult. You know, those sorts of things. That's what we mean also by current. Do you need general operating support? Like, what are your current, absolutely right now, if you could say what's happening right now, what do you need? What are your priorities? There are some funders on this call. We are your advocates. It's really helpful to hear from you. So don't be shy. And if you are shy, put them in the chat if you don't want to speak up.
Great, thank you. We have a share from Allison for Friends of Sacramento Arts. It's to build advocacy relationships with the 14 Sacramento County School Board members to establish budget funding at the district level.
Excellent.
So one thing
I just wanted to mention that we were just several of us were just in another meeting with SCOE, and the California State Framework and Standards have come out, the new ones for arts education. And, the framework and the standards are required, but they're not mandated, which that means that they can be on the chopping block. So comparing that to PE is a requirement and a mandate, which means it can't be cut. And so long-term, how to advocate Californians for the Arts with California Department of Education to get arts education as a mandate, so that's not a constant fight for the dollars year after year, and make it the district and the state's responsibility to continue to fund it on a regular basis and not eking out one-time funding every year.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to note that ballot measure would be an ongoing $800 million specifically for arts education. So that's something I think, would solve some of that. But then you to continue to hold your local, school boards and communities accountable to make sure that it is actually spent in that way. But there will be some reporting if that actually goes through. I also want to mention our colleagues at Create California. I know Allison, you know about them as well, are really the primary arts education advocacy organization. We work really closely with them, but in terms of taking the lead on arts ed in that, particularly that fight, which is definitely one of their sort of raison d'etre, the reasons that they're there, is to make sure that it is not just a requirement or suggested, but that it's actually that school districts are held accountable and it's mandated.
If that large amount of money is approved, will there be opportunities for us to understand better how it's going to?
Remember, that would be a ballot measure. So, and they have to get the signatures, about 1 million of those by June. They have to shore up support likely from things like the CTA, the Teachers Association, labor. And then it would be a matter of getting, I think it's 2/3 is a ballot measure. And so voters to approve it. So is it 2/3 or a majority? I can't remember. So, so that's, it's a significant challenge. But I think they have a lot of really, like Dr. Dre and John Lithgow, they've got some celebrity endorsements really pushing it forward as well. So you'll be hearing more about that. So definitely follow us, follow Create California as well for more information. But we'll likely be working on that. So you'll hear about it.
Yeah, we're part of a statewide cohort. We're the representative for Sacramento with Create CA.
Definitely in the chat, several call outs for the need for operational funds for organizations.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I think, we're these sort of like the funding for like the Parks and Rec. I mean, I'm speaking at the state level. It's really exciting and cool, but sometimes these sort of shiny object one time makes us all fit into pretzels to apply for things when you're doing great work. And what you really need is more support for the great work you're already doing and providing for your communities. So that's part of why we're trying to get increased general, just the baseline funding for the Arts Council to be increased so that more funding can go out into the field.
Also, there's a question in the chat from Teresa about seeking funding for a documentary series about Afghan families relocating in Sacramento. If folks have any ideas for her, especially locally, if you could respond in the chat, and I'll respond as well. And then there is a question from Brooke that you're seeing that, Julie. Okay.
Yeah. So Brooke, you're absolutely right. In this last year, the California Arts Council has prioritized organizations budget sizes of $250,000 and under. They also just recently voted to do that again with the majority of their grants this coming year. And that's something that we're actually very much looking at and would love your feedback on because Although we understand the intention of that, which is many small budget organizations under 250,000 particularly are emerging organizations or organizations serving and led by people of color. I think that was absolutely the intention. At the same time, there are amazing organizations that have $280,000 budgets and $300,000 budgets and $1 million budgets, and everybody has a need. So we definitely want to. I think our organization, you'll see us coming out with some advocacy around this particular issue, because it definitely is of concern that there is almost very little funding for organizations with budgets above $250,000. So if that's of concern to you, I would also love to hear about that. And please do share that with us. If it's not, if you support that and you think it's great, we also want to hear that. Both. I see a hand up from Buddy, and then I think, Carrie, you probably want to move to the next piece.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, let me try and fix my camera real quick. Hi everyone, how is everyone doing? Hope well. Okay, so I wanted to try to unpack some of the stuff that we're experiencing as a resource for musicians, right? We are a creative hub for people wanting to get into music, people that have been doing music for their whole lives, et cetera, et cetera. And as a nonprofit that is sort of doing this work, one of the challenges that we experienced, we were ineligible to apply for the Shutter Venue Grant. Their requirements were too much for us. And the kind of gut punch for our organization was, since we offered, no one turned away for lack of funds to any of our shows, we were not eligible to apply at all. And that felt not great, because we wanted to make music experiences accessible to everyone, and that seemed to make us ineligible. So I appreciate your comment earlier about reach out to you for individuals who had a hard time applying. And I just wanted to sort of comment about that. Not sure if anyone else on this call experienced that as well, but that sucked. Another thing that we're sort of some things that we're experiencing include, and some resources and some things that we'd like to try to get some more advocacy for, is living wages for musicians. It's very much a gig economy. Where a band that comes through our venue, they're lucky if we have the funds to give them $50 per band, right? And then if you think about that in terms of having, a 4-person band, $5 each band member is that's normal for a lot of bands kind of playing shows in local venues if they're not, Madonna. So yeah, I'm hoping that we can really start to have conversations about flipping that script and making it normal for bands to get paid a normal wage, so they can not have to work other jobs, but they can do their art as their main job, be able to pay rent and not have to live off of ramen. So yeah, the language that I have landed on is, I want to eliminate the idea of the starving artist. I think that shouldn't exist anymore, and let's kind of rally against that. A couple others, I don't want to take up too much time, but permanent space is a real issue. We're having a real hard time not being kicked out of our spaces because of rent increases. We're having a really hard time being able to have the biggest impact out of our programs because rent is so high. We can't find permanent space. We want to be a resource for future generations, and empty buildings are all around us. So yeah, I think that's a big conversation that we've been trying to have for years. So maybe we can kind of advocate for that in 2022. And yeah, I think I'll stop there.
That's excellent. Thank you, Buddy. And I already saw that you sent an email, so I appreciate that. And I captured a lot of that in terms of living wages. That is absolutely something we're very focused on in terms of our work. That's what you saw in the Creative Workforce Act. But it is also something that we are looking at in terms of those policy roundtables, and what are some of the solutions that we can look at creating the foundation for creative workers to be able to do their work, not hold down 3 or 4 jobs. There are models in other countries and whether it's, unemployment models, whether it is the sort of idea of guaranteed income for creatives. So there's a lot of different things. It's not always going to happen necessarily overnight, but I think that there is towards this more than we've ever seen before, and an awareness of the value and impact that artists and creatives bring to our communities. So I'm hopeful more than I probably have been in other times that we can move towards that. So stay tuned and continue to engage with us as we develop hopefully policies that we can bring to the legislature to see these types of things change fundamentally, because this is fundamentally the issue. I see other hands being raised, and Kara, I'd hate to stop the conversation and go into my sort of very basic how to do advocacy. I think it's more valuable to have the
I
conversation.
agree. I was going to suggest we skip that, and we will be sending out a beautiful deck about advocacy after the meeting.
And you can also we'll do more advocacy trainings. We'll be doing one on March 25th. So you can come to that. So I'd rather just engage people in conversation since people are raising their hands. It's wonderful to see. So Justina, I think you've had your hand up.
Hi. Yeah, so I have a lot of needs, but the one that is on my mind right now is grant accessibility. And I've heard in the past on calls like this that grants should be easier because artists are dumb. Not that artists are dumb, but that artists need more help, and that the grant application should be easier. At least that's what I took away from it. I don't think that grant applications need to be easier, but I do think that they need to be more accessible. For instance, I'm currently working on the Cultural Art Awards grant for Verge, where I work, and I also help other orgs with grants. So I'm also helping another nonprofit. And I think that, this grant was released right before the holidays, when many people have had such a challenging year and they need time off. So it was released the week before the holidays, and then the workshops didn't start until, the first week of January. So I imagine, like myself, many arts administrators weren't able to begin this grant until after the first week of January, and the deadline's tomorrow. So that's just a couple weeks. So I feel, and I'm a person with a master's degree. I have so much experience writing. I write grants for other people for a living. And this application has literally taken up like all of my Verge working hours for the past 2 weeks to do this. I see someone saying same in the chat. So like, what about people who, maybe don't have master's degrees, or they don't love writing like I do? What about disabled people, who might need more time for this type of stuff? I would like for this grant application and other grant applications to have a longer duration. I think that so many of the questions could be more succinct and grouped together, and just made this a much more, pleasant experience. And I contacted the city to provide some feedback, and the response I received was not very understanding of my what I brought to them. I will provide more feedback later, but I just want to say that I'm disappointed in the city of Sacramento with this grant application, because the whole application is about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Yet I do not believe that this application follows those DEIA standards. So I'm upset about it. I mean, it's not. I mean, I'm doing it because we all need funds, and I greatly appreciate the funds, provided by the city of Sacramento and this opportunity to apply to this grant. But I'm frustrated. So that's just what I wanted to add to that.
So I just want to say, I think that's really critical. And I think there's some people here, and Melissa has already responded. And I also want to say that working closely, because I have a lot of board members, as well as working closely with the state and other people who who write the grants and do all of that, we all know that their intentions are good. So I want to start with that. They want to do a good job. And I know that because they're incredibly hardworking, and they are all on our team as well. So this feedback's really important, but I also want to always center it in that our intentions are there. And I know that good intentions are there. So I think that I just want to throw that out. I don't know if anyone.
No, I do agree. I do agree. And that's why I want to give more feedback, because I think that the city has been doing an amazing job, especially with COVID response and just being there for artists. So I don't want to say that I'm not upset at the city. I'm just saying this process has been frustrating, and I hope that it can be improved in the future.
Absolutely. No, I really appreciate that. And I don't know if anyone from the city wants to directly respond at this point, or if we got 2 more comments. So I'm going to go ahead with Karen. Your hand was up, and then Nikki, and then anyone from the city who's here is welcome to jump in as well.
I will try to turn my camera on too, because it's probably weird to. Yeah, hi. I just wanted to say a couple things. One, this may not be great news because it's a 5-year waiting period, but CATA opened their wait list for affordable housing, their affordable housing program in January. And we already had like hundreds of applicants on there that applied, so for just to be on the wait list. But I'm mentioning it because it has been years since we have opened these lists, and we have 4 of the list open. And if people get on it now, they have 1 right of refusal to stay on the list. So if that is something that you can project far ahead for anybody, get on the list now, because God knows when it's going to be open again. 2, SHRA has opened all their wait lists too, and I don't know what theirs situation is, what that's looking like, but I know that those are 2 incredible resources that have been closed down for a very long time to artists. And no telling when they'll open up again once those close. I know CATA's list is closing in like 2 weeks. We had planned on keeping it open till March, but the influx of people was so large that we had to shut it down.
Karen, can I interrupt you for 1 second? You're using acronyms. Not everyone's going to know what those are. So if you could just share both those, what those are, that would be great.
Yeah, CATA is the Capital Area Development Authority, and we manage 42 blocks south of the Capitol. We do mixed use infill development. So oftentimes it'll be commercial below, and then we have a mix of affordable and market rate apartments. We also developed the Wall Project, which I'm sure those of you from Sacramento know is the affordable housing project for artists. And then I have some exciting stuff on the forefront that may come through, and if it does, I'm going to need artists that are willing to do temporary art pieces out in the public realm. And so I'm putting together a really comprehensive proposal right now in order to get the funds for that. And if I get the funds, we're looking at something that would be upwards of 3 to 5 years of me managing it. And I want to be able to switch it out quarterly, if not monthly. So unfortunately, I'm going out on medical leave for a couple of weeks starting tomorrow, but I did give you guys my email. So if I don't get back to you guys, just know that that's why, but I would appreciate any ideas that people want to pitch for temporary uses out in the public realm. I'm also going to be working on something for sure in the near future, where we're redeveloping along O Street, and we're going to be putting some permanent art in those. So we're not a big organization that everybody knows to follow, but if you're at all interested in doing art in the public realm, we're very open to pitches of ideas.
Thanks, Karen. And why don't you go ahead and share your information again in the chat, since there's been a lot of conversation. And Stacy, I hear lifting up that not everyone on this call is from Sacramento. Absolutely. But part of what's no, it's totally great. Part of what's helpful is to hear what is happening, because maybe you don't have that in your community, but we can start to also share and model. So so thank you for sharing all of that really amazing information. Nikki, I see your hand is up.
Hi, thanks. Hi, everybody. This is such a great call, and I'm really getting a lot out of it. I just wanted to say thanks for all that. I wanted to sort of piggyback a little bit on what Justina was saying. And I from my perspective as a mostly full-time grant writer for arts education, I've felt similar feelings to Justina in the CAA grant ask, but it's sort of the same thing that I have been noticing in a lot of funding opportunities at the local, state, and federal level lately. And what I think I would just like to really point out is that often what happens is we sort of swing back and forth between trying to get funding to smaller organizations, emerging artists, grassroots efforts, and then we swing over to what we need: accountability. We need people that have infrastructure. We need people that can produce outcomes and data and all of that, and can meet all the reporting requirements. And we swing from one side to the other. And I would really love to see like a concerted effort to find a middle ground where people can be accountable, can be walked through not only the application process so that all the funding doesn't just go to people that understand a web portal and understand what the difference between an output and an outcome is and all of that. I would really love to see like smaller organizations be walked through the process and be able to access that funding that they can't. And I would also love to see larger organizations still have access to funding. The CACs, I really applaud what they're doing, but it was a huge hit to us, particularly here at 916 Inc. We lost 30% of our funding for the year because we were an organization with a budget over $250,000. So we need a middle ground, and we really need to not react to those two extremes. I think that's just where I'm really struggling with right now.
Nikki, I think you really described it so well. And, these are conversations I can tell you are definitely happening within our own organization and board, where we're really talking about, how do you make grant processes accessible and equitable and serve all of the field. I can say, number one, you still need to get more money because that helps to offer more to everyone. But secondly, I think that this is such a rich and important topic. And I think that in terms of advocacy, because part of what we do is really try to support people to become effective advocates, that this type of information, for whether it's state, federal, or city or counties to understand, is really, really important. They need to hear from you. And so when you have your regional organizations, it's a good transition to sort of go to our local partners here and talk about that. Sharing that with your local partners and making sure that they're actually you are all working together to bring these to the people who are making these types of decisions is really, really critical. So Kara, I'm going to hand it back to you maybe, and we'll kind of go into some of our partners here.
Yeah, with that, I'd love to give our partners each a bit to speak and respond to. And I'd love to start understanding that not everyone's from Sacramento. I'd love to start with William from Grand Theater to talk a little bit about his work in Tracy and how you intersect with advocacy there in San Joaquin County.
Sure thing. Just want to say thanks for having me today. It's quite an interesting collective we have on the line, so happy to be a part of it. I think the most interesting thing that may be a benefit for the group is that I represent an organization, the Grand Theater Center for the Arts, which is government. In fact, we are good government. As a municipal interdisciplinary arts center that's incredibly unique in the state of California, as well as across the country, we very quickly became an advocacy tool for others as a model project. So, we're collaborating with other cities, community leaders, and organizations from across California, but also doing consults from across the country. What is on the other side of that coin is that this influence that we have and the resources that we have to share with a large regional creative community is not necessarily reflective in our own county. We have a very challenged county, 14th largest in the state, about 800,000 people, yet the arts are incredibly underrepresented. So, what we can do is share our experience with others. And being that we're in a county where influence is largely still made through word of mouth, we are the first to remind politicians that the folks in the arts vote. They pay attention and they vote. And being able to have a conversation at a social event or a fundraiser and putting a bug in their ear about what the concerns and needs are with a thoughtful mind is certainly the most valuable thing we can do in our area. And I think there's some other counties out there and other communities across California that share in that experience. And a lot of times they are overwhelmed by the industry speak. And they need very simple, effective tools to be able to have a personal approach to advocacy.
If I could quickly just respond, that's so critical, William. And I there was a portion of today where I was going to go through a little bit of an advocacy presentation, but because the conversation was so ripe, we ditched that, and I think that was the right move. But I do think that, you know, we offer those types of trainings to support communities to be more effective. So look out for that, and reach out to us as well. We want to help. This is really critical to build the network, because what happens regionally also affects what happens at the state and what happens at the federal levels as well. So they are all looking at each other. But you're absolutely right, William. There's a need for advocacy networks in in our communities, particularly for, you know, arts, culture, and creative sector.
Yeah, thank you so much, William. Allison, I wanted to hand it over to you to do the same for Yolo County and Yolo Arts and your work there.
Great, thank you, Kara, and thank you for including Yolo Arts in this conversation as a partner. My name is Allison Flora. I'm the Executive Director of Yolo Arts, which is also a state and local partner with the California Arts Council, so a county-wide organization here in Yolo County. And kind of speaking to some successes within our community, I would say that advocacy as a collaborative effort for the arts is newer to Yolo, newer to some of our organizations of coming together and having shaping a one voice that can then be shared out with our elected officials, and mechanisms for also then gathering information that we can then support those talking points and those outreach efforts to those community leaders and elected officials. We are still working on, you know, and advocating for actually getting dollars allocated to the arts and those types of recognitions. But I will say, you know, one success around kind of that collaborative voice that we received was there wasn't any CARES funding associated with support for the arts in Yolo County at the county level. And there was, you know, as a group, we really got together and shared that back with the county, and it was definitely heard. And it created a partnership with the Yolo Community Foundation. So I think for us that we're starting to build that infrastructure that hopefully will then lead to more successes aligned with funding and other types of more general support. But I do want to echo what William mentioned about just industry speak. And I think one thing that we are noticing is while we do have, you know, good working relationships individually as organizational leaders with our elected officials, it's different to come at it from an advocacy standpoint. It's different to come at it as a collective group where we're looking at the arts as a whole, as opposed to representing just our individual organizations. And I think one thing that we really want to do, you know, kind of shout out to the Davis Arts Alliance and some other partners that I've been working with, is really start focusing on equipping our leaders with language that they can use in their own conversations around arts advocacy. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know that, you know, we sort of discussed too the role of inserting advocacy into your work plan a little bit too, and that shift and how that looks and feels even when you do hold a lot of the knowledge and the language. So thank you so much for sharing. And I want to allow space as well for Liv to talk a little bit more about Sarah's work in the Sacramento region, which is involved in Sacramento County and beyond. And Liv, I hope you'll touch on that a little bit too.
You are muted. Welcome to 2022.
Rookie move. Yeah, so, you know, when we were all chatting on the call before it went live today, it struck me that I think the place where, you know, even though I'm kind of speaking about two different efforts actually at the moment. So for Sacramento specifically, I think the fire really got ignited around advocacy in around 2019, because that was the first time that we were going to see a really just shocking cut to the arts regionally, like probably the worst it would have ever been cut up until that point. And I think it was a wake-up call for a lot of people, especially me, who had kind of just accepted the circumstances of what had been up until that point, and seeing the arts getting cut all the time and always kind of being the last in the conversation. And then suddenly it was like, okay, well, it was a little bit, and now it's just everything, and that's it. And that was the moment when it was really clear for all of us that we have to be paying more attention and we have to have a more unified voice. But at that point, all of us were doing our own individual work. So, the idea that we were going to get together and join forces to make something across organizations and platforms and industries was not very likely. And connecting not just organizations, but also the artists and the musicians and the people that are being served by those organizations, the performers, the creators, all of those people. So fast forward to 2020, when suddenly all of us are stuck in our houses, and that's when things got even more dire than they were before. And the lack of that infrastructure became even more pressing. And there were two things that came out of that. And one of them, watching all these different conversations that were going on throughout the region about relief funding for all different industries, I started noticing that a lot of my friends in other fields had a much more concise, business-like approach to getting into policymaking conversations to get funding. And us, the arts, are sitting here doing all the wonderful things we're doing, but we're kind of a big bag of personalities, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I love it, and that's why I love being here. But that's a very difficult thing for a policymaker to go, yes, that is a thing I want to give my money to. And so that was when we really started to go, hey, we need to focus on the fact that we're cutting salaries, we're laying people off. We support artists through an annual studio tour, some of whom lost $10,000 in annual revenue that year. I mean, just really impactful, legitimate, tangible things, not touchy-feely things, even though those are beautiful, but real things. And so that's when this consortium of existing advocacy efforts that had already been undertaken at that point, Shira's on the board of SARA. There were a lot of different efforts that all of us were doing individually, but it started to become more apparent that we had to work together. And also we needed to work regionally, because if YOLO Arts starts having more of a presence, if Placer has more of a presence, if Brooke starts seeing more success in Roseville, there starts to become a groundswell where people recognize that this is an industry deserving of support that contributes to society in an impactful way, the same as the restaurant industry, the same as anything else does. And so all of our individual projects are amazing and really make great testimonials when we're going in and advocating for support. But also the thing that really came to the fore was the consistency in the message, and making sure that every one of us is going and saying, I feed myself off the arts. I help make payroll for a group of 13 people who also feed themselves off the arts. So I want us all to get in a group hug about how touchy-feely wonderful we are, but I also want you to understand that we're contributing to the local economy. And so I think that's been one of the biggest things to come out of all of this. And the last thing I will say, become a member of CFTA, because we need the work that they're doing, and that membership supports that. And also you can become a member of SARA for free. Okay, that's my pitch.
Thanks, Liv. We'll make sure that we get links in the chat and with follow up with everyone as well, just to get to connect with Liv and Sarah. And Megan, I want to give you space as well to speak from your perspective about your intersection with arts and advocacy in Sacramento.
Thanks, everybody. And actually, before I do that, I really do feel like I need to say, as a leader of the Office of Arts and Culture, and that we are administering the Cultural Arts Awards grant program, I'm happy to talk about that moving forward. I do want to say that one of the big things that we're trying to do, and also trying to balance this time, is to actually share more specificity and be more transparent about a rubric for review. And from an equity perspective, a lot of times you can lay out criteria, you can lay out points, and people aren't using the same sort of definition or same sort of standard. And you get a lot of panelists who are looking at these things in different ways, and that's not equitable. Now, the question of how the rubric translates to the application, I think is totally up for discussion from my vantage point. And I think the whole conversation that we have post this, anybody who wants to talk about it, we can absolutely do that. We're going to take feedback in anyway, because it's a part of our practice, and a good funding partner to all of you, I think, frankly, is taking in feedback and improving to make it easier for you. So there is always this conversation, intent versus impact, and balancing that, and really trying to make sure that you have what you need and you have the time to do what you need to do. And I think for us too, a little bit sensitive and recognizing that people need money. We can't wait forever to make these things perfect before they go out, but there's absolutely an opportunity for us to improve as we go and improve with feedback. Aside from that, I think the one thing I'll say about advocacy is that really thinking about the roles that different people play inside. And, you know, in our structure, we have a city manager form, mayor city manager form of government. So there's council, there's a city administration, and then there's the outside team. And I think there's a role for everybody in the advocacy discussion there. There's a lot of information that we have in the city on the city administration side about how things work that we can share with advocates so that they can understand and better position themselves. And it's those three things kind of working together, right? Like the outside influence, the inside knowledge, and the champions on council that really facilitate the kind of active change that we really want to see. So I would just want to put both of those things out there. I think all of that is really important. A strong partnership between advocates, between administrators, between elected leaders is really, really very important. And you've got to build those relationships and execute them, you know, well. So happy to talk to anybody moving forward about some of these other issues related to our office. And thanks so much for the opportunity to be here and listen to everything that you're worried about, concerned about, and working on.
Thank you so much, Megan. And that's a great segue into thinking about building relationships with elected officials and advocacy tools. I'm going to hand it over quickly. We only have a few more minutes left, so I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Tracy to talk a little bit about Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month and how we're going to follow up with all of you.
And before we get to that, Megan, I just wanted you to know that there was a request in the chat for an extension. And I know that other agencies do that when things are pretty dire, particularly with the impact of COVID again. So just wanted to make sure you saw it. All right, Tracy.
I did, definitely. Thanks.
Okay, Eddie, if you could fire up the slide presentation again. And I just want to encourage everyone, let everyone know about Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month, which is April. Last year in July, Californians for the Arts, with the support and force of advocates like you, got the state to declare April as Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month. And during that month, and if you remember from the budget timeline, it's in between, right before the May revise of the budget, right? We have a full month of activities. This year's theme is the arts work. And next slide, please. And throughout the month on Fridays, we will have webinars, advocacy trainings, working on particular themes around how the arts work and what our impact is. We will have opportunities for you to take action locally, resources and toolkits, as well as social media campaigns. And for those of you who are ready to get your influencing experiences on, we also have our advocacy week, where we will organize you to have virtual meetings with your elected officials, and we will have an in-person advocacy day in Sacramento. So for those of you who are interested, I hope you can drop in the chat if you didn't already include that you'll be interested in participating in Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month in the survey, and we'll be reaching out to you as follow-up and to let you know the schedule and how things are going to roll out. We're very excited about it. And next slide, we're just wrapping up. Carol, I'll let you close out.
Great, thank you. It's 5 o'clock on the dot, so we want to honor your time, even though it feels like we were getting into so much great conversation. So I want to thank you for everything you shared with us today. Know that we'll be following up with you in multiple ways, not just with the resources from this meeting, but also through what we're providing through Arts, Culture, and Creativity Month and beyond. So we'll be staying in touch with all of you. I really want to thank our partners, Megan, Liv, William, and Allison. Thank you so much. And again, just thank you to everyone for being here today and sharing your thoughts and opinions. Really, really appreciate it.
And please continue to fill out that survey if you haven't submitted it. We really, really need that data and information from you in order to continue our advocacy. And if you need trainings in your local community to be effective advocates locally, please reach out to us. We'd love to do those and teach you how to fish. Have a great evening. Stay safe, stay well. Thank you.